Hi, welcome back to My Smart Learning. This is a Year 12 lesson for A-Level Biology. It's Year 12s and Year 13s. It does come up in the Year 13s. The beginning is Chapter 11. We're looking at the second part of photosynthesis. We started last week on looking at the overview of photosynthesis. We're focusing today on the light-dependent reaction. Learning objectives then. Why do plants need light? What is the purpose of that? But before we start, of course, we need our virtual high five. You need to answer all 5 questions to get one of those high fives from me. Right, so number 1, what's the word equation for photosynthesis? Number 2, what's the symbol equation for photosynthesis? Number 3, what are the layers of tissues in a leaf? Number 4, what are the structures that you find inside a chloroplast? And number 5, what are the 3 stages of photosynthesis? Have a go at answering those questions, press pause, and when you're ready to go through the answers, press unpause now. So, what is the word equation for photosynthesis? Well, we know we need carbon dioxide plus water with the arrow. On top of the arrow we've got sunlight and chlorophyll. And then we get glucose plus oxygen. So that's our word equation for photosynthesis. Number 2, what's the symbol equation? I call it the devil's equation. So it's 6 CO2s plus 6 H2Os. Arrow gives you C6H12O6 plus 6O2. So that's your symbol equation. What are the layers in a leaf? Well, we've got the waxy cuticle, top and the bottom. Okay, that's that waxy layer, gives it a waterproof layer, prevents water loss. The first layer of cells though, the top and the lower, so you've got the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis. And beneath the upper epidermis we have the Palisade Layer. Beneath the Palisade Layer we have this, we call it the Palisade Mesophyll, mesophyll meaning middle, so the middle layers are called the Palisade Mesophyll. And we've got the spongy mesophyll below that. Within the spongy mesophyll, you've obviously got your vascular bundle. Within the vascular bundle, you do get your xylem vessels and your phloem. And in the lower epidermis, you also get your guard cells, which gives rise to your stomata, those tiny holes. So, what we are looking... Oh, I missed question 5. Number 5 then. Obviously, we need to get number 5 right, or you don't get your virtual high five. Obviously, I missed question 4 as well. Right, number 4, what are the structures in a chloroplast? So you've got the membrane, the double membrane that covers the chloroplast, but within that, the jelly-like substance like cytoplasm inside the chloroplast is called stroma, and the discs are called thylakoids. Those thylakoid discs are little stacks. Each stack is called a granum. And the grana, which is plural, they're interconnected by those little membranes called intergranal lamellae. So that's your structures you find inside a chloroplast. And then what are the 3 stages of photosynthesis? Well, the first stage is the light capturing stage, where light is absorbed. The second stage is what we're looking at today, light dependent reaction. And the last stage, the third stage, is the light independent reaction. So we're focusing on the light-dependent reaction of photosynthesis, which is one of the major stages of photosynthesis. That's the bit where light is needed. So what are the things you need to know? So you need to know or be able to explain the processes of oxidation and reduction, explain how ATP is made during the light-dependent reaction, describe the role of photolysis or photolysis in the light-dependent reaction, and explain how chloroplasts are adapted to carry out the light-dependent reaction. Now, photolysis and this whole light-dependent reaction, there is on your Caboodle login, if you log in, there is an animation that you can watch, and it goes through that in quite good detail, so make sure you have a watch of that. So, first of all, we need to know what the difference between oxidation and reduction is. So if you've done chemistry, which you've all done GCSE chemistry anyway, or the trilogy, science trilogy, you should have come across this notion that oxidation, well the basics of it is oxidation is when you add oxygen to something So reduction is the complete opposite of that, where you take oxygen away from something. But you never get sort of one of those reactions. Usually oxygen is taken off something else. So if something's being oxidized, something else is being reduced. So oxidation, oxygen combines with something. Reduction was some oxygen gets removed from it. On the flip side, there's two extra bits of information you need to know as well. Now, looking at electrons, we say, if you remember the acronym oil rig, so OIL-RIG. So oil will stand for oxidation is the loss of electrons. So when something loses electrons, we call it oxidation. And the rig stands for reduction is the gain of electrons. So when something gains the electrons, it's being reduced. Okay. Now there's one other thing when we talk about hydrogen ions as well. So when you gain oxygen, that's oxidation. Now on the flip side to that, if you gain hydrogen ions, that's also known as reduction, which is the opposite of oxidation. So therefore, if you lose hydrogen, you're being oxidized. So that's known as oxidation. So 3 meanings for oxidation and reduction. I am going to put the PowerPoint on Show My Homework, so there are hyperlinks to that. So there's other hyperlinks to other YouTube videos that you can watch, and animations and so on. So, quick little overview then. This is a very, very simplified basic version of what's happening during the light-dependent reaction. I'm going to move on further and go on to some more, slightly more complicated ones, although this does look a bit complex. So, do plants need for photosynthesis, or why do plants need for photosynthesis? Well, what does the word photosynthesis mean? Photo means light, synthesis means to make or to build. So sunlight must be needed, or light must be needed in photosynthesis, or else the word photo wouldn't be in there. So this is the section, now there's 2 major sections, or 2 major chunks of reactions that happen in photosynthesis. The first half of it, I suppose, is the light-dependent reaction. So it depends on light. It can't work without light. Now, if this one doesn't work, then if you've got no light, then the second one can't happen. Because if the first one has to happen first, obviously, and that links in, the products of this one will be the reactants needed for the light-independent reaction, which we're going to watch in your next lesson. So, what's happening in the light-dependent reaction? We need 2 products from the light-dependent reaction. Those 2 products are ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is our source of energy, and we've got reduced NADP. Okay, so we've got reduced NADP. So these are our 2 products. So we need to make those. That's the whole point of the light-dependent reaction, to make ATP and reduced NADP. And you also get a byproduct. That byproduct is oxygen. So oxygen isn't actually needed for photosynthesis. What happens is it's a waste product from photosynthesis, but in particular it happens right at the early stage of photosynthesis. You get oxygen given off, and that oxygen diffuses out through the stomata and into the atmosphere. And obviously that becomes vital for us because we need it, because we're for aerobic respiration, for organisms that need it for respiration. So plants will also need it, because they get their aerobic, they will use the oxygen as well, but obviously they make a surplus, and that surplus comes out through the stomata. So what happens during a light-dependent reaction? How does it all happen? Well, first of all, you need light, hence the word photosynthesis, light. So here's light, and I should also have another one here, which is one missing from here. Should have had light energy hitting that chlorophyll molecule. Sometimes we call it a photosystem. That's your chlorophyll molecule, and light also hits water. Now, when light hits water, you get this process called photolysis. Photolysis. If you put the 2 words together, you get photolysis, photolysis. So we can break that word down literally. Photo meaning light, lysis meaning to split, to break something up. So photolysis is using light's energy to split something up. And what's it splitting? It's splitting water. So water will get broken apart. And the products of that are electrons and protons, because water is made from H2O. So H2O will get split into hydrogen ions, electrons, and oxygen molecules. And the oxygen, like we said, is a byproduct, it's a surplus, it goes away. But those are the two things we need from photolysis. Now, I'd like to sort of explain the importance of that reaction on Earth, because if we try to get electrons and hydrogen and protons from water, we need to put a vast amount of energy in there to split water apart. We can use what we call electrolysis, but we need to put quite a bit of energy in there to get to break that compound apart, to get that proton and electron. Now, plants are doing this naturally at extremely low levels of energy. You're literally talking about photons of light, just the tiniest amount of light, and you're getting water to split apart. Now, that is an absolutely amazing thing. Because this is happening, plants can do this, we're getting glucose being generated, being made, and oxygen being made, which is fundamental for life on Earth. It's the beginning of the food chain. So life on Earth wouldn't exist as we know it today if it wasn't for the fact that plants do this absolutely amazing thing where they can split water at such low levels of energy, literally tiny, tiny amounts of energy to split water apart, giving us those two things. Now, scientists and engineers are trying to do this, okay, and make, battery cells and trying to generate electricity and generate energy by getting these guys, so then we can make energy from those or transfer the energy from those in our cells or generate electricity and so on. But we need to split water. But if we're putting in more energy in than we can actually get out of it, then it's a waste of time. So if we as the human race could crack that concept, what plants are doing naturally, if we can do that, in a system where we can do it in some kind of machine, that we will be able to solve the Earth's energy problems. Okay, so that's just trying to show you to appreciate the actual. It looks like such a simple thing, but it's absolutely an amazing thing. Now, when water is split, we get those electrons. Now, what do those electrons do? Those electrons get mopped up by the chlorophyll molecule. So, remember what I said about oxidation and reduction, oil rig? Well, if it's gaining an electron, what's happening to the chlorophyll molecule? Well, the chlorophyll molecule is gaining an electron. Therefore, the chlorophyll molecule is being reduced. So the chlorophyll becomes reduced because it's gaining an electron from when that water has been split. Now, a light hits the chlorophyll molecule. Okay, so light's constantly obviously hitting the plant all the time. So there'll be light hitting the water inside the plant, there's light hitting and being absorbed by the chlorophyll molecule. But when light is absorbed by the chlorophyll molecule, this electron that it's gained from this water gets excited and it raises energy level. So it rises, it's getting a kick up the backside and it shoots right up. So you can see, increasing energy level, this electron becomes excited. Now, if the electron has been lost from the chlorophyll molecule, the chlorophyll now has been oxidized. Oxidation is the loss of electrons. So initially it gets reduced and then it gets oxidized. Now, if you kick a ball up in the air, what's going to happen to that ball? That ball's going to come back down. So this little electron is coming back down, but it comes back down, these what we call electron carriers, these proteins that you find in the thylakoid membrane. And as they come down, there's energy transfer. Energy can be transferred and it helps to produce ATP from ADP plus PI. Now this is a simplified version, it's more complicated than that, which I'll show you on the next few slides in a second, okay? Because we do need an enzyme for that. So, but the energy that we did get from these electrons and also these protons, because these protons you'll see are going to move against their concentration gradient and then they're going to flow. The energy from that as well will help to ATP to be produced. However, at the end of all of this as well, you've got this molecule called NADP. Now, NADP will get a proton attached to it, and therefore it becomes NADPH. We either call it NADPH, or you call it reduced NADP. Okay, you can't say reduced NADPH because remember what we said? Oxidation is the loss of electrons, reduction is the gain of electrons, but reduction is also the loss of oxygen or the gain of hydrogen. This NADP here has just gained this proton. If you look from the water, it's gained the proton, so it's gained the hydrogen, so it's now reduced NADP. It's gained that. So that's basically the light dependent reaction. And the light dependent reaction then ultimately leads us to having some of this, reduced NADP. It gives us the ATP as our products, but initially from the proton and the electron that gets split from the water from photolysis, and we got a byproduct of oxygen. So that's a simplified model. It's a little bit more complicated model. It's exactly the same idea. What you've got though is here's water being split. The electron from that water enters the photosystem. Now if you notice there's photosystem 2 then photosystem 1. So there's two different proteins that you find in the membrane, the thylakoid membrane. And we start with system 2 rather than system 1. It's the opposite way around. But this is at a lower energy level. So if you notice, light hits it, the electron shoots up, and as it comes down, the energy from this electron transport chain is energy that provides some of the energy to make ATP, so we get some ATP made. But then, if this electron gets into this photosystem 1, now that's being reduced because it's gaining an electron, then light hits it and that gets oxidized, okay? And then that electron will start to come back down, and then that electron that we initially started with eventually joins my NADP and my H, but because it's a H plus, I want to cancel out that positive, the electron there, the negative electron and the H plus cancel each other out, so you end up with NADPH or reduced NADP. That's why you need the electron and the proton joining together. So there you go, you got the electron there. So here's the electron joins, that's that electron here, it's come down here, joins on with the H plus, so H plus and a minus becomes neutral, it's got no overall charge, so you've just got H left over. That H is the thing that joins onto NADP, so you get NADPH. So you can either call it NADPH or you can call it reduced NADP. Now, the reason I showed you this one, this is from like the old textbooks that I used to use. They show you that there's two photosystems. So it goes up photosystem 2, comes back down, goes up photosystem 1, and then comes back down, and then that electron will eventually join the proton to make NADPH. However, sometimes, because this is higher than that, sometimes instead of going back this way and then ending up making this NADPH, this electron here can fall back down to here, and then what can happen is it will come back and do this, go up here, fall back there. So you're just constantly recycling that electron here, and by doing that you're just popping off some ATPs, because every time it comes down this electron transport chain, drops there, because this is a higher energy level compared to this one, as it falls to that one, as it comes down this electron transport chain to enter this photosystem 1, what's going to happen is the energy has been transferred to make a few ATPs. So it's a few little free ATPs there. Okay, obviously light's hitting this one, so it's being recycled again and again, and this will eventually keep losing the electrons. So how does it gain more electrons? Well, it gains more electrons every time it's run out of electrons. Every time water gets split, it'll give the electron. So what would happen to photosynthesis if there's no water? Eventually, there'll be no protons, no electrons. Photosynthesis would stop, because this needs a continual supply, the chlorophyll molecule needs a continual supply of these electrons. Okay, so these are the notes I've given you. So you can obviously make your notes using the PowerPoint, so I'm going to be on show my homework. Chlorophyll absorbs the light energy, we know that. It boosts the energy of a pair of electrons within this chlorophyll molecule. It raises its energy level, so it becomes in an excited state. Electrons leave the chlorophyll molecule, that means they're being oxidized. These electrons are taken up by the electron carriers, therefore they're being reduced. These electron carriers form a transfer chain in the membrane of the thylakoids. This energy is used to combine an inorganic phosphate, as in a Pi molecule, with an ADP molecule in order to make ATP. Now, While making ATP, the chlorophyll molecule loses electrons which need to be replaced, and this is done by splitting up water molecules using light energy. The equation for this process is this. Now remember, if you split one water molecule, you get it with two hydrogen ions, but you can't have oxygen by itself. Oxygen doesn't exist by itself. Oxygen always hangs out as an O2 molecule. Okay, it's a diatomic molecule, O2. So if you need two of those, that means you need two whole water molecules in the first place to balance out this equation. So therefore, if I'm using two whole water molecules, I'm going to end up with 4, because 2 times 2 is 4. I'm going to end up with 4 H pluses, so 4 hydrogen ions, plus 4 electrons. If I got 4 H pluses, I'll have 4 electrons, and then plus my oxygen molecule. So from one water or two water molecules going through photolysis, you end up with 4 protons and 4 electrons. And you get that byproduct of oxygen. So that's to make 1 mole of oxygen. However, if I used one water molecule, you'd have to half each of these numbers. You'd get 2 hydrogen ions, 2 electrons. You'd end up with half a mole of O2. Okay? So, the purpose of water then is to give us protons, electrons and oxygen. Now, what about the structure of it then? How is the thylakoid adapted for this function? Well, the thylakoid, remember those little discs that you get, those stacks of discs that you get in the chloroplast, they're flattened little discs. They look like little flattened biconcave discs. And the reason why it's that shape is it gives it a large surface area to volume ratio, and therefore you can attach more chlorophyll molecules. If you've got more chlorophyll molecules, you've got more electron carriers, you've got more enzymes, you've got more of this network of proteins in the grana that holds the chlorophyll in a precise manner, so you can absorb more light. It's a bit like those leaves I was talking about. If you stand under a tree, the leaves are arranged in such a way that they can capture as maximum amount of light as possible. Same thing for the thylakoids. The membranes have so many chlorophyll molecules, but the way they're attached with the enzymes attached to them, they're all arranged in such a way that they can maximize and capture as much sunlight as possible. So the grana membrane holds enzymes to make the ATP, and the stroma also contains DNA and ribosomes, so it's a quick manufacture of proteins and enzymes. So chloroplasts have a little bit of DNA in them, and that's a little bit of evidence from talk about evolutionary relationships between organisms, because mitochondria do as well, that mitochondria and chloroplasts may potentially have been technically single-celled type organisms before evolution and the organism became more complex. So what could have happened is chloroplast could have been living on its own devices and suddenly got assimilated with another organism, as in plants. And same thing with mitochondria. It's a bit of evolution theory. So what does it look like? So this was a bit of a complex one. So this concept of chemiosmosis in the thylakoid, this is basically the more sort of complex version of what we did at the beginning. So light hits a chlorophyll molecule, and so this is a transmembrane complex containing chlorophyll molecules. So this is the stroma inside the thylakoid. This thing here is the thylakoid membrane. Okay, so this is the stroma. So this is the stroma that's the stroma inside the chloroplast. This is the thylakoid membrane here. This is the thylakoid space. So that's actually, this bit here is inside the thylakoid disc. So this is outside the disc. This is the stroma inside the cytoplasm as such inside the chloroplast. Light hits this transmembrane molecule, and when it hits it, remember we said the electron gets excited. What it does is it moves along these electron carriers. So these proteins here these are the electron carriers. Now remember, when light hits, water gets split. If it's one water molecule, you get half a mole of oxygen, but you'll end up with 2 lots of protons being produced. Okay, so you've got 2 protons, and you've also got electrons being produced as well. Now, if you notice that if you're getting hydrogen ions building up here, you've also got a proton pump actively transporting protons into the thylakoid using energy from the electrons from chlorophyll. So that ATP initially that was being made, remember we said about the electron transport chain going down, that ATP is actually driving the active transport of this protons being pumped against the concentration gradient. Remember, it's active transport, so it's going from a low to a high. Now look, it's a high concentration of hydrogen ions here. Why? Water's being split, giving us lots of these hydrogen ions. You're also pumping more hydrogen ions in. Well, why do you want to do that? Why do you want it to become very, very concentrated with hydrogen ions inside the thylakoid? It's going to start to become acidic. Okay, you could potentially die from acidosis. Now, the reason why is this. So these electrons are helping to make us some ATP, but that ATP is using to pump the hydrogen ions. Eventually, you've got all these hydrogen ions. What happens when you got a concentration gradient? Concentration gradient always goes from high to low, so you're going to get some diffusion. Now you've got some open channels here, right here. So this open channel is called a stalked particle here. It's got an enzyme called ATP synthase attached to it. ATP synthase, as you know, is an enzyme that helps make ATP from ADP plus PI, ADP plus inorganic phosphate. With the ATP synthase, will produce ATP. But we're going to make lots of ATP. Why? This is what we call a electrochemical gradient. So this is why it's called chemiosmosis. Electrochemical gradient. Why? These hydrogen ions will flow like a stream of ions, like that, like an electric current. Instead of flowing electrons, it's going to be flowing protons. This flow of protons is transferring electrical energy. It's an electrochemical gradient. That electrical energy then, electrochemical energy is being transferred, helping this ATP synthase generate, the energy is being transferred from into the bond of ATP. So it's joining ADP plus PI. So therefore we've got lots and lots of this ATP. So that's the purpose of this chemiosmosis in the thylakoid, because we're making ATP, but this hydrogen ion needs to get mopped up, because if it doesn't get mopped up like I was talking about, you're going to end up with acidosis, and acidosis will kill living things. So what you've got then, this is a summary of our light dependent reaction. So this is our thylakoid membrane. Light hits it from the outside, hits a chlorophyll molecule. Remember, when it does that, water at the same time is being split, because the light's going to hit the water molecule and split it. You get hydrogen ions, we get these electrons. Remember, the oxygen just goes out through the stomata. These electrons then will go through the electron transport chain, these electron carriers, therefore giving us the energy to pump hydrogen ions more into here. What does that do eventually? All these hydrogen ions that build up here will come through this channel protein here with ATP synthase, it's the ATP synthase channel, and convert ADP plus PI into ATP. However, we've got these electrons to mop up and we've got those hydrogen ions to mop up. They need to go somewhere or you're going to get a problem. The organism will die from acidosis. So if I mop up the hydrogen ions with the electrons, I join them onto my ADP, I end up with reduced NADP. Okay, so reduced NADP, or we just call it NADPH. And those are the two things we need for our next lesson, which is going to be the light independent reaction. So the whole purpose of the light dependent reaction is to produce ATP and reduced NADP, or also known as NADPH, so that it can be used in the light dependent reaction, which will be next time on My Smart Learning. So if you learned something today, that's amazing. I'm glad hopefully you guys are all keeping safe and you're getting on, cracking on with your work. Make sure you're doing your notes and your summary questions and your exam style questions. I know Miss Martin is setting work on photosynthesis and show my homework as well, so make sure you're covering covering her work as well. I forgot to give you a virtual high five, because you can't buy those in the shops, but I'll see you next time for the light independent reaction. So virtual high five from me.